and it's very different from the big old woody center of the tree. So ideally, carbon and nitrogen ratio of 8 to 1, 10 to 1, 12 to 1, depends on who you ask. And that's what will make compost break down fastest and give you the quickest usable compost. Now, if you take nothing but sawdust and make a pile of it 10 feet deep, it's eventually going to break down. But if you mix it in with some material that has more nitrogen in it, it will break down a lot faster. And if you want to make those oak leaves break down a lot faster, spray a little molasses on them. That stimulates the things that make them decompose. But you're never going to get diseases out of a compost pile that you would have to worry about. Everybody's so worried about oak wilt these days. No, never going to be in a compost pile. Yes, ma'am?
You're talking about just layering it because you said not to turn it. So it's okay to layer green?
Either that or mix it up as you put it in. Yeah. I layer it in that I throw in one thing one day and throw in the next thing the next day, but I don't, it's not a scientific thing and it's not an exact thing. Just kind of let it mix up a little bit as you go and it'll work out fine. The way that I do, if you went to my garden, I've got 2 compost piles made just out of fence wire about this big around. And I'll fill this one until it's full, and then I'll go over and start filling this one. By the time I get this one full, this one's ready to use. By the time so I empty it out and put it there and start filling it. By the time I get it full, this one's ready. And just alternate back and forth. I think a 2-pile system works well. Yes, ma'am?
Pepper Joe sent me. But, and so he said this anyway.
Okay. Kim, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
And 2 questions. When do you know the compost is ready? And is there anything you should not use? I mean, you're saying basically...
Okay, both good questions. The compost pile is ready when it stops producing a lot of heat. The way Malcolm always said when he made compost, he would stick his hand all the way into the pile and pull it back out, sniff. If it was stinky, it wasn't ready. If it smelled just like, you know, good old earthy soil, it was ready. But the main thing you'll notice is that it stopped producing heat. Things you should not put in it. Meat scraps can be a problem if you have raccoons and possums and things like that get into it. But you can always dig a hole and bury those in the ground. And, you know, they will do good things in the ground. And herbicides should stay out of the compost pile. The worst herbicide in the world, the only thing that is known that microbes will not break down, is this stuff that people sometimes spray on their hay. It's called picloram, and it's sold under names like P plus D or Grazon or things like that. It basically kills everything except grass, and it doesn't go away. Stay away from that stuff. It's nasty. It'll ruin your soil, it'll ruin your garden, it'll kill your plants. It sees everything in the world except grass as a weed and tries to kill it. But other than that, no. Eggshells, citrus peels, whatever else, all that can go in the thing.
That's what I was going to ask, orange peels.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know where this rumor came from that orange peels were bad for the compost. Nothing at all wrong with them. In fact, Howard Garrett was doing some work in Central America, and it's just kind of the typical thing. On one side of the hill, there's a big aloe plantation where they're growing aloe vera, and they're having a problem with root knot nematodes. On the other side of the hill is a huge orange grove that's doing orange juice concentrate, and they don't know what to do with all the peels that they've got when they juice the oranges. Well, they ship them to the other side of the deal, work them into the soil, and for some reason something in orange peel kills nematodes, so they get rid of their orange peels now, and the aloe grower doesn't have any more nematode problems and has better soil. No, nothing wrong with orange peel in it. Anything else before we move along? Yes?
What's the difference between compost and compost tea?
That is a good question, and be sure and come back next week when we talk about it. If you took compost, you've got a good solid material. That's what that bag's full of. If you put a bunch of compost in a bucket and filled it with water, let it sit for a little while, and you poured the water off of that, you would have what we call compost leachate. It's full of all the microbes and things that were in the compost. If you took that compost leachate and you dumped in a bunch of stuff to make those bacteria and fungi reproduce, you know, have a real orgy in there, and then if you added a tremendous amount of oxygen to it and let it bubble and brew, then you would have compost tea. If you want to see compost tea when you leave, there's a gray machine over there that's bubbling away making compost tea. But that's actively aerated compost tea, and that's the subject of next week's seminar. It's great stuff to use, and what it is just a super concentration of the microbes that you get out of the compost. You need to use it quickly. Once you take it away from the oxygen, it has about a 2-hour shelf life. But compost tea is great stuff, but we'll save that for another time. Yes, ma'am.
If the citrus peelings help with the root knot nematodes, would orange oil help as well?
If you got root knot nematodes, keep a good organic mulch on the surface of the soil. Compost or something, you won't have any root knot nematodes. It's best to control them naturally rather than trying to, in effect, kill them with anything. In compost, there is a fungus which grows. We've already talked about the fungus make those long threads. Well, this particular fungus makes very thin threads, and if you look at them with an electron microscope, they look like little croquet wickets. And who knows how all this has evolved. But those trap nematodes, this fungus that feeds on bad nematodes, actually gives off, in effect, a scent that makes that little blind bad nematode think, okay, here's a root I can go burrow into, or here's something I can eat. When that nematode starts through that little loop, it triggers something. That loop swells up instantly with water and literally grabs it and lassos it and holds it and digests it. You know,
Well,
yeah, life and death in the garden.
If I had them, then I could work to an organic program. How soon would I see good results?
At least 10 or 15 minutes. It gets better and better over time. It'll take a season or two to wipe out your root knot nematodes.
And would chicken litter be a good additive to that, and the citrus peelings and the...
Chicken litter is one of the best things going. The fertilizer that we sell, my favorite fertilizer is the Medina product. Medina makes a product they call Growing Green. When we find a product we really love here at the nursery, we go to the people that make it and say, how do you make it better? We like their Has to Grow, so we went to him and said, how do you make it better? And Stuart says, well, if I was going to do it over, I'd add more humates and more seaweed. We said, fine, do it, put it under our name. We call it Natural Solutions Liquid. The Webster Grow people that make the Rose Glow, best blooming fertilizer I've ever found. We went to them and said, how would you make it better? I don't know what Gary said he would add, but he started adding several different things, and we call it Color Essentials. We love that Growing Green from Medina, so he said to Stuart, how would you make it better? I'm not sure what he's putting in it that makes it better, but we have the same product we call Landscape Essentials. It's just enhanced. But their base for their fertilizer is poultry litter. It's a poultry litter-based fertilizer. Now, yours I'm not concerned about, but you have to be real careful with poultry litter fertilizers because it's this factory farming that this country's into, and I'm not going to get on the soapbox that Bruce Dooley does, but if you could see the way that they raise chickens, they crowd them together even more tightly than you're crowded in here today and expect them to live and be happy, and to keep them from pecking each other to death, they feed them arsenic. It's a drug they call roxazone. It's full of arsenic, and that's what they use to keep the chickens calm enough to raise them up to where they can kill them and send them to the grocery store. You eat most grocery store chicken, you're getting your little dose of arsenic, which is not a good thing. Stuart, the poultry litter that he gets and uses for his fertilizer comes from, I believe it's Cargill, which is the one chicken company that does not use roxazone. So it's free. You may hear about, oh, it's not safe to use chicken litter because it's got arsenic in it. That may be true of some chicken litters, but it's not true of what you're producing at home, and it's not true of what goes into the Medina fertilizer. Okay, yes, sir.
Is there an easy way to get rid of cutworms?
Cutworms. Cutworms are easily killed with a natural bacterial product called BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. Spray a little bit of BT around periodically. Doesn't kill anything except caterpillars, which is basically what a cutworm is. You'll also find that if you're putting out beneficial nematodes occasionally, it'll usually get rid of the cutworms as well. If you have a real serious problem with them, save your soup cans and things like that. When you plant your tomato plant, plant it down through a soup can or something, because one thing about cutworms, they can't climb. And so you can put a little ring around, but I just spray with a little BT periodically, and I rarely ever have a problem with cutworms.
Bob, will the pick-grind treated hay hurt corn?
Yes, sir, I think it will. I'd have to go back and research that to be sure, but I'm pretty sure that picloram will hurt corn. Corn is a monocot, pretty closely related to grasses, so I'm not absolutely certain on that. I know it'll tear up alfalfa and everything you grow in your yard other than grass, but I'll have to research that for you and you'll see what I can find out. If somebody offers you a bunch of manure and you think, well, is this manure safe to use or does it have picloram in it, and the people won't tell you or else you don't trust them, Take a bucket of water, dump some of that manure in and soak it for a day or two, and then go out and find a broadleaf weed, a dandelion, henbit, chickweed, something like that, a broadleaf weed. Pour that manure water over it and go back 2 days later. If the weed shriveled up and died, you got too much picloram in that manure. If the weed's still growing like mad, you know that it's not picloram treated. That's how you check for it. Okay, let's move on to